like a skull and crossbones emoji.
I like to save my sugar intake for cake and like, really fulfilling things. Okay, we're going live. Oh, I think we're live. Wait, no. Preparing.
Are we on?
We're live. We're live.
We are.
And I'm gonna pull up my phone.
We are. I see it on my phone now.
Welcome,
Good morning, everybody.
Coffee and a pastor. Well, three pastors.
Coffee with several pastors.
Three pastors and a lady person.
3 pastors and 3 social workers.
I know. I'm here. It's Fran and the social workers.
That's interesting. 3 pastors and 3 social workers, but they're not all overlapping.
That math, yeah.
This should be a Venn diagram.
And I think pastoring, like social work, you don't have to have the formal education to do the work. I think you can pastor, you can do social work.
Oh, that's true.
Wait, did you say you don't need formal education to do social work? I'm just kidding. Wait, what'd you say?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a world where you need credentials, and credentials are good, right? But
well, yes and no. Yes.
Yes and no.
So Naomi is watching, and Lyle is watching, and Jana is watching.
Lyle, crocodile.
It's like people were waiting for us to come on or something.
Is it the real Lyle or the fake Lyle?
What is that?
I had a conversation with the fake Lyle on Instagram.
Oh, he did get hacked, or not hacked.
Fake Lyle?
They were chatting me up, and I said, I feel like I was already friends with you, and they said, she said, I am man, and I was like, this sounds like a cheap Chinese knockoff of Lyle. And then they disconnected their account.
Well, I got so many messages. It was funny. I was like, why aren't people messaging Lyle? I was like, did you get any messages from people letting you know that someone stole your account? And he was like, one. I was like, why is everyone telling me? It's funny.
Hey, Tori makes a great point in the comments. This is just a trigger warning. So our conversation today is about death and grief and loss. So if you are not in a headspace where that is an okay topic of conversation for you, hey, catch us next time. We love you. We'll try. We'll obviously always try to be sensitive, but we totally understand if anybody needs to duck out. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and that said,
add to that is that if there's anything that I say that people have questions about or that do trigger you, and there's things I can maybe do to calm you, you can always send me a message. I don't mind talking through and processing with people.
Yes, we do have Tim here, and we he's a really, the reason we have him here is because he's so good at navigating this conversation beautifully, and we want to pick his brain. So Fran's going to introduce our guest.
Yes, we have here today I guess we're like forever friends. We've been friends we've literally known each other, well, your whole life, because I'm older than you. So we are longtime and close friends, and Tim is like my go-to person for whenever I need to have a conversation about, I don't know, like deeper, weird spiritual shit. So Tim is a licensed master of social work, and he works in hospice, working alongside folks who are transitioning out of bodily life. Yeah. And he lives in Louisiana, and he also roasts coffee and makes kombucha and rides his motorcycle and gardens. So
right, tell us about your coffee. We want to know what you're drinking.
Yes, what are you drinking?
Tell us about the journey to the cup.
This is the coffee. So I, years and years ago, probably 5 years ago, I started getting more into coffee. We've drank coffee at camp meeting for years growing up. As a 3-year-old, we would get coffee milk in our beds to wake us up in the morning.
Wow.
Yes.
And so I've always appreciated coffee, but 5 years ago, I got a single origin coffee, and it sort of changed my life. And it was like fresh roasted, had like the date on it. It was maybe a week old. And I realized that I could never go back, but it was too expensive to continue to buy from people. So I learned how to roast my own coffee and made my own blend. And I don't know if you can see it. got an espresso machine, and now I sort of go from bean to cup. I'm even doing we were talking about that, even my own oat milk blend now of cashews, oats, and coconuts blended together and
Wow.
strained, and it's just like a really nice alternative milk for my coffee.
Wow.
Sounds amazing. Almost as good as my Keurig reheated.
It's honestly too much. If you're thinking about getting into it, just keep with the Keurig.
So I'm drinking watermelon juice, not coffee. Tell us about your role that you serve in your work, but I think you articulate it as a calling, right? Also.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no
Yeah,
way I would do it without it being part and parcel. And I think that was kind of what got me into it was knowing, when I started out, I was in electrical engineering, and I found out I was a little bit dyslexic. And so the math sort of got over my head pretty quick. But I was giving homeless people rides and meeting new people and sort of listening to people and hearing stories. And my sister-in-law at the time, I don't think they were married yet. So my brother's girlfriend at the time talked to me, and she's like, have you ever thought about social work? And it sort of steered my life in this direction. But yeah, so social worker for Heart of Hospice, what it represent? And here in Alexandria, Louisiana, I go into homes. I think what people think of when they think of social workers is like a resource person, right? Like somebody that can navigate Medicaid and Medicare and help people find more services that honestly aren't available anymore. And so a lot of my job is explaining to people that we sort of have a bad financial state. And so there's not as much help as we think there is, but how do we pull people around this situation? You know, the people that we have are diagnosed with terminal illness, 6 months or less to live. So I'm going in a time of crisis, oftentimes various stages of grief, whether they've accepted that diagnosis, to people in complete denial. Our company uniquely is able to care for people who are still doing some of those things that maybe aren't considered hospice because they're palliative. So radiation and chemo and things like that, as long as they're palliative, can still be done. They're expensive, and so a lot of hospices aren't able to provide that, but ours is. And so those people sometimes can be in a very different state from people that have switched over to completely palliative care. So my job is to meet them where they are and sort of lead them through that, and it morphs and it changes. I have people a lot of times when you walk into a home, the scariest question I can get is, so what exactly do you do? And not because I can't tell you what I do, but because every situation is so different. And what happens for one person may not happen for another person. And so there's really no need to go into everything, but I'm going to be there through the whole journey, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Tell us what makes you well suited for this work, or uniquely suited for the work of walking alongside people who are facing their mortality in a very immediate way.
Yeah, so I guess I approached it from more of the grief and loss angle. As a kid, when I was 9, my father passed away, and so I had to learn to grieve from an early age, and my family did as well. And my mother and I, we talk about it a lot because we sort of grieve together, and we made mistakes and talked to each other. I remember her saying one time early on that I was really upset one day, and she said, "Well, heaven, God really wanted your dad to be with him, and so it would be selfish of us to want him here." And that just made me cry even more. And I said, "Mom," I said, "you can call me selfish, like, because that's what I want right now." And she said, "Me too." And we just hugged and realized that that's okay to be in that place, And so I worked through that on my own. And it was a sudden death. It was a heart attack that we didn't really have time to prepare for or have conversations about what that would look like or anything of that sort. And so as I grew up and as I became a social worker and started thinking about it's such a broad field where I wanted to focus, I thought, man, do what you know and do what you've sort of worked through on your own. And for me, that was grief. I'd known that my whole life. And so to sort of rewrite that story and be able to walk people through that in a way that empowers them to be able to do some of those things that I wasn't able to, it's just sort of a powerful thing for me. It's what gets me going.
So the point at which you and I really connected on this issue was a couple of years ago when my mom and I were navigating the very difficult death of my grandmother, Virginia. She passed away in 2018. And so at that time, we had a hospice company there, and they didn't provide a social worker to us. So Tim was my social worker. Tim was the one that my mom and I were on the phone with asking questions of. And so the gift that you gave me at that time was, well, I mean, there were several, but I think sort of distilled was this idea that what's happening is normal and natural and a part of life. And you were able to help me normalize the whole journey, even though it was pretty traumatic and it wasn't what I'd call like a good or easy death for her. Can you tell us more about your take on how death is part of life?
Yeah, so it's a tough question because our society and everything within our own being, and I think our flesh especially, draws out for those connections. And so when we lose them, it seems like such a foreign thing to have to not have someone here physically. And so what I'm constantly reminding people is that love never dies and that love is what continues. And so that's the biggest thing with my job, is sort of reframing the situation, to not look at the actual disconnection point, because our minds have this tendency to be drawn towards negativity, I guess, or whatever you want to call that, towards suffering or pain. We sort of focus in on it in a way that's probably that flight or flight response that we're sort of anxious about or scared about. And so we get hypersensitive about it and we focus on it. But when you take someone back, it's sort of like looking at a painting. When you take someone back from that moment and you look at a person's entire life on this earth, it's everything. It's this full spectrum. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned probably since COVID hit. It's been, I've had a lot of time to sit at home and think about while we've been working from home, but to sit and sort of process, this is the full spectrum of life, that I guess there's sort of that Eastern religion idea of yin and yang, that you can't have one without the other, and that suffering and pain and loss are just as much a part of love as happiness and joy and all those other things that we sort of prefer to have all the time. But it gives us that full spectrum. When we experience loss, we know what mountains, like when we're in the valley, we know what mountains look like, and we can appreciate those in a different way. So it's sort of a broad answer to your question, but yeah, I think it is sort of that stepping back and looking at the value of it. And that's hard. It's really hard for some situations when you have someone that's really old and prepared to die and they've had this long life. That's easy to sort of explain, but that's not always easy. Every situation's different. So
I feel like you look at things differently than a lot of what I've heard, or just, how our society is just doesn't handle death well. We're not good at ritual surrounding death. We're not good at naming death. Like I think you were watching when I was talking about my grandma a few weeks ago, and she died 3 years ago. And I was saying, how do I say like her death day? Like, how do I say, I don't want to say the anniversary of her passing. It's like, we have to like sugarcoat everything. And we were talking about that a little bit before we even went live. And I was wondering if you would share your perspective on that more, and how you really get to right to the heart of it. But it's in a way that is more comforting to me than all of the platitudes and things that we usually.
Yeah, so I think people, our society shies away from it because we want to whitewash everything, right? And that's sort of coming up now with race issues and Me Too movement and all these things where we want to sort of sugarcoat things and say that everything's fine and life is roses and blooms and all these things that we enjoy looking at. But life is also the ugly underside. And if you never look at those things, if you never sit with those things, then you never grow. I mean, that's where growth comes from, is the struggles that you have and the pain and the suffering. I sit with people, and one of my favorite things to do is when I get a new patient and there's not family present, I'm able to sit and talk with just a patient by themselves with what they're going through. And when you start out, it's sort of closed, and you start asking, with my assessment, it's very specific questions that I have to sort of get through, the formalities of, have you done funeral arrangements? Have you done this and that? And I don't do it in a dry way or even ask everything all at once. But when you move past that and when you start to ask those questions, you can see them start to open up. And it's like, no one's ever sat and just said, for a lot of them, no one's ever said that they were dying. You know, doctors aren't even willing to go in the room and say, you have 6 months or less to live, because they have that curative mind. I don't know what I'm thinking from myself, what I look at from them, but I don't know what their motivations are. But I think it's because they have a curative mindset. They're a hammer looking for a nail. And so they get to the end of that road where there's no more nails and they sort of don't know what to do. And I guess that's where hospice is good. People that are used to dealing with what to do when you don't have any more nails. The reality is there are still nails. There's still work to be done in someone's life, even after they know that they're dying. And there's still pieces to pick up and puzzles to put together in their life. And I think it's sort of where a lot of people's life begins, when they start to really look at the time that you have left, and it's scarce. There's not a lot left, and so they value every moment. And for a lot of people, it's a breath of fresh air. When you walk in and you just state what's going on, it's like, okay, we can walk together now. You're with me. You've come and you've sat right with me where I am, and you haven't tried to sugarcoat what I'm going through. And so we can start to take steps forward and sort of process it, you know, and make something beautiful out of it.
You, Tim, you used the word curative a couple times, and I suspect you have some thoughts on the difference between healing and curing.
Well, that's a good question.
So I know in my chaplaincy work and working with social workers, I've heard those two terms differentiated. I'm wondering if you have any.
You know, I mean, I guess I think of healing as, and maybe this is coming from my being a father now, but I think of it sort of like looking at my children and the bigger picture of what is good for them. And that sounds bad. I don't think that's something that happens. I don't know that there's a seer that is looking at what's good for us and makes us go through things that are painful because we have to. But there's just a love to it. There's a perspective to it. And, you know, when I was actually talking to someone on Facebook, because I posted a picture of, a video of my son learning to skateboard, and he didn't have any pads on or helmet. And it was sort of dangerous. And someone pointed that out to me, and I said, you know what? I said, danger is part of learning, and the fact that we go through things that are painful. You know, if he falls and he scrapes his leg, he learns to be more cautious, or he probably learns that it's not as bad as he thought, and that he still really enjoys skateboarding, and it's worth that. It's worth the pain of the risk of getting hurt to go through that. And that's exactly what my son did. He fell when he first got on it. And he looked at me like sort of confused and betrayed that I hadn't protected him from that. And I said, look, I said, this is skateboarding. I said, if you want to learn to skateboard, you're going to fall. It's going to hurt sometimes, you know, but it's fun when you get on it and you learn and you get better and you can cruise down the road, right? And you can go downhill. And he sort of did that. He learned how to push off twice, and it was very exciting for me to watch him do that. But I feel like I got way off topic on it, but sort of the same thing about looking at loss in a different way, that it is good for you in some way. And I think that's where the scriptures are talking about he will, what is it? Y'all will know. He brings all things towards the good of the people that
All
know
things
him.
work together, like the Romans 8 idea of all things work together for the good of those who are called.
Those who are called, yeah. I don't know.
It's
That's
a
sort
faith
of,
statement. I wrestle with it. I don't always agree with it, but it's a
Don't
faith
get Matt on a
statement.
theological tangent right now.
I'm not.
I'm just kidding.
well, I think that and maybe that's it. There's just value in suffering, that we can learn a lot from it, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And I if I have that chance with patients, it's hard to talk with families about that, because they do just want to gravitate in and take away all the suffering, which is understandable. It's something that's very tragic and difficult for families to walk with patients through. But for that patient, there's something to be gained from that. And recently, the biggest thing that the other analogy that keeps coming in my head when I'm working with people is the idea of death being a lot like childbirth. That it's sort of one of those rites of passages, except we all get to experience the death one, even the males. So there's, with childbirth, there's that tension and there's that suffering, and it's different for everybody, and no one can sit you down and say, this is exactly what it's going to look like. There's just infinite number of variables. And yet on the other side, there's a birth of something beautiful, the birth of a soul, and or not, or a tragedy, and there's loss with that too, because that happens as well. And so, but the process of struggling, I think, is a beautiful thing that helps us grow and teaches us in ways that we would never get if we weren't exposed to it.
You told me that metaphor in 2018 when we were going through Jen's passing, and I remember thinking, oh, I remember there being a light bulb going off in my head, because I had never walked a death journey with someone, but I've given birth, and I could understand, for whatever reason, that metaphor could resonate with me. So I'm sure there are other metaphors, but that one was particularly helpful.
Good. I need one for males, so if you think of one, let me know.
Noted.
What is the big struggle for me?
Or not non-birth, to people who haven't given birth.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So will you tell us a couple stories, just a couple of your favorite stories of interactions with folks?
Ooh, yeah. So one of the big things that is, I guess, beautiful in my job is seeing love, like pure love, at times of crisis. And obviously the ones that you sort of see the most in is the ones that have been married for 50 plus years, and the husband or the wife is there beside her spouse and not willing to leave. You walk in that room and you sort of, as a social worker, you talk about self-care for your caregivers and taking breaks and letting people take over for you while you take a nap, and all these sort of beautiful things that you hope people are able to do so that they don't get burnt out. But you look in the eyes of those people and you say, you've been here for 60 plus years, you're not leaving. We've got a shelter in place. But there's such a beauty in that hand-holding and that love that encompasses everything, because I know those relationships aren't perfect either, that there's struggle within their relationship as a couple. They've probably had moments of falling apart and moments of closeness, but right there in the last moments, there's just that full spectrum of the suffering of the loss, but yet the love of being totally connected with someone in those moments too, that I think is really beautiful. I've to come up with specific ones. We were talking about the COVID unit that I work, I guess was one.
Yeah. I liked that story.
I volunteered. We got special permission from the state to open a COVID specific unit, inpatient hospice in New Orleans. And so I went for a week and got to work on that unit. And it was after being quarantined for a long time, and Louisiana was just about to open up. And so it was sort of a moment of realizing that I was going to have to face it anyway, and I should learn how to put on PPE, to be honest with you, but also that there was probably something I could bring to the table as a professional and as someone who works in hospice. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're sort of uniquely qualified to help people with loss in a time where we're going to be experiencing a lot of it. And so I wanted to go to that place, sort of like Jonah and the whale, but I wanted to go to that place and be there with them and see what I could do if there was anything I could do. And so I went, and there was several family. I mean, no one has seen their families in weeks and weeks and weeks because they were either in a nursing home or quarantining. And so the moment we were able to have 2 visitors a day come onto the unit and put on full PPE and have them be protected as much as we could, and walk them into the room and let them see their loved one for maybe the last time. And also do FaceTime with people that couldn't come or were vulnerable and didn't want to come. And so there was one family I was able to do a FaceTime with. All of the grandsons were on. It was like 4 or 5. And the grandfather who was dying in the room wasn't responsive, but I was able to tell them, from everything we know in science, hearing is the last thing to go. And so let's give it our best shot. And spiritually, I think you can still speak to people. That's a pretty easy jump to make. And so they began to just pour out stories of their grandfather and what they had done together and how much he had taught each of them. And I was just sort of sitting back with my face shield fogging up with misty eyes, realizing that love was being passed on to his grandsons, and they were able to sort of vocalize that. And then to turn around and they thank me for that moment is very humbling, because it didn't feel like it was anything I had done, but just being present is really the most powerful thing that you can do. To be non-judgmentally present with people, I think in a lot of situations is really the goal. There was another one, the 65, I think they were married for 65, 66 years. And the husband was the patient, and the mom, I was talking to the son, and he was like, man, he's a military guy. And he said, I'm really trying to keep mom from coming up there because she's 86, 90, somewhere in there. And she really doesn't need to be exposed to this. So can we do a FaceTime call? And maybe that'll, but she's demanding to come up there. I don't know if I can keep her away. I said, well, let's do a FaceTime. And so she did. And he called back maybe 30 minutes later, and he said, she's got to come up there. She needs to see him. And I said, okay. I said, look, we'll wrap her as best we can. We'll do the best we can. We'll try to keep her as safe as we can. And she came up, and we did that. I was able to walk her up. She came on, and she walked in with her N95 on from outside. And I got her in our clean room and switched it to our N95 mask and let her put hers in her pocket. And when she took hers off, she had bright red lipstick on. And I said, you got dolled up, didn't you, just to come see him? And she smiled real big. She said, I did. And it was just sort of this moment when we walked in. She sat with him and she held his hand, and we had to get him comfortable. He was sort of one of those that had the terminal agitation coming on. So I had to get my nurse to give him some medicine and get him comfortable. And when she was able to see him calm and comfortable, it was like you could see her relax, and she was able to just sort of hold his hand and be with him. And she said they had said the Lord's Prayer together every night before bed. And so they said that prayer together. Well, she said it, and he listened, and he was completely unresponsive. But to see her go through that, and at the end of it, she said, you know what? She said, I'm ready. She said, I'm ready for you to go. I've got our kids. They're taking care of me. It's your time to go. I'm going to be okay. And she turned to me. She said, we're ready to go. And we walked out. And when I was going down with her, she said, thank you so much. I can't remember the exact word. Thank you so much for being with me, is what she said. Thank you so much for being with me and allowing me to say what I needed to say. And it was like, I mean, that one really hit me, because I didn't do anything to get that moment together. They had prepared for that for 65 plus years, but it is a powerful thing to be present with people. And it was very life-changing to be on that unit and to be present,
Thank you for sharing. I know we're getting close to needing to wrap up, and I'm hoping that maybe you'll read the poem from that experience. But can I ask you just maybe one last question, and that is, how do you find hope in these times? Because you're always navigating death in what you do, but right now death is abundant. And so how do you find hope? But also, like, do you have a word for others in the helping profession or the medical field who are just expending so much energy caring for people, and just exhausted.
Yeah. So the word for healthcare people is sort of the social work thing of take care of yourself. Do those things that help you get through the day normally. Just do them more, and be more intentional about them. If that's sitting and reading a book or taking a bath or whatever that is, take breaks and really be intentional about those breaks, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so make sure that you're filling yourself, and be proud of being present in this, because we're uniquely prepared for it. We were called to this because we want to help people, most of us, and so being with people in the midst of it can be a life-changing thing if you let it. But yeah, I have it here if you want me to read it.
Our snappers are ready.
Okay. It's called At the Bedside. Can I touch him? Can I hold his hand? Of course. We somehow find strength in the midst of weakness, these moments when we can't hold back tears, when love is hanging in the room like a cloud, and pain of separation waits just on the other side of last breaths. We are permeable to this, the full spectrum of love. Fragile moments where flesh and bones say goodbye after 66 years, growing intertwined, these holy few precious moments. We are humbled just to be present in the midst of it, somehow finding a middle way. This pain of loss has come to hollow us out again, leaving room to be filled with more love. Like digging holes in the beach in low tide, the water always rushes in. Passover with the hopes of Pentecost in its wake. We said this prayer every night before bed together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. It's time for you to go home, honey. I'll be okay. Thank you for being there in the room. It was good to have you there to talk to. Thank you for letting me. Most times, just being present is the most valuable thing in the world. Love doesn't die, it only transforms. It is a tree that blooms and fruits and loses its leaves and blooms again. Love is all of these seasons, and I am honored just to be present with it.
Thank you for sharing.
We are permeable to the full spectrum of love.
Yeah.
It's such a lesson.
Thanks for sharing that intimate uttering of your own spirit from personal experience with all of us. We hold it dear. Thank you for chatting with us. We got to sign off. It's been over 30 minutes, but thanks for listening, guys. And hey, let's see, it's Thursday. Our next Coffee with a Pastor will be with another social worker, guest Jana Munoz from our very own Deacons, Peace of Christ Church, social worker here in Round Rock. So she's going to take the mantle and continue the conversation. We'll see you guys before then, though.
Bye, guys. We love you.
Bye.